So I made a video a while back where I recommended to all of you some movies that I like and I think you should check out, and a lot of you liked it. So while I'm finishing up a few more videos that are coming on the channel very soon, I decided to make this a series and do another one. Some of these movies I watched for the first time and rewatched because of your comments. So again, if there's a movie you think I'd like, drop it in the comments below. I might talk about it in the next one of these videos. As with the first video, this isn't a ranking of any kind, nor is there any real rhyme or reason as to how I selected these movies. Some are classics you've definitely heard of before, and some maybe you had no idea existed. If I can spread the word about great movies on this channel, I'm gonna do it. So let's do it. The first bit of movies I'm going to talk about here are animated films, the first of which was recommended to me in the comments of the first video, and is a film in this director's filmography that I hadn't seen yet. Millennium Actress feels to me like Satoshi Kon's love letter to the power of cinema. It carries a lot of his usual themes and motifs, like the inability to distinguish fantasy from reality, and using said fantasy to explore the psychology of a character. But where something like Perfect Blue does this in a way that reveals a harmful side to the way people attach themselves to media and celebrities, here these sequences are used to show the strength of our protagonist, and how her determination to find the person she loves seeped into every character she played on screen and allowed her to show the world a very real part of herself. A part of her that our secondary characters are fascinated by, as they interview her and, by extension, take part in her real memories that are woven into the films that she starred in. The film handles this part of its narrative very well. I never once felt confused despite the sporadic jumps from reality to film. At the end of it all, you feel like you've gotten to know this woman. Everything she's been through comes together in a finale that left me very emotional and further solidified Kon's place as one of the greatest to ever do it. Thanks for the comments telling me to watch this one. I absolutely loved it. Sticking with anime for a bit, I want to shift gears to something that's very tonally different from Millennium Actress. Where Millennium Actress was beautiful and hopeful, Jinro the Wolf Brigade is incredibly bleak, presenting us with an alternate history version of Japan where fascism grips the country and civil unrest leads to the intervention of some of the scariest foot soldiers of a dictatorial government you'll ever see. This movie is actually only part of a larger franchise called the Kerberos Saga, created by Mamoru Oshii, whom you might know as the director of Ghost in the Shell. I want to get more into this franchise, but knowledge of it isn't necessary when watching this movie. I didn't find it hard to follow when I first saw it a few years ago, and it's become one of my favorite anime films from the 90s. The story deals with corruption, secret organizations, political revolution, and most importantly, the moral dilemmas of its main characters, leading to some gripping and heartbreaking moments, punctuating some brutal violence. The animation here is absolutely incredible in all of its late 90s glory. I recently watched this great video by Beyond Ghibli covering this film and the Kerberos Saga, and I highly recommend that as well after watching the movie to get a sort of overview of the rest of the franchise. As you all probably know by now, I'm all about animation being more appreciated as a medium, and the best way to make people respect the work that goes into it is to show them something that reflects the insane amount of work that goes into an animated film. It's hard to talk about The Thief and the Cobbler without discussing its very troubled production history. Richard Williams is remembered as one of the most respected animators in the history of the medium, and he began work on what he hoped to be his magnum opus in the 1960s, and after a very long and tumultuous production that you can find several videos about here on YouTube, I'll link to them in the description, The Thief and the Cobbler was finally released in 1993, but the story doesn't end there, and that's not the version of the film that I'm going to recommend to you. You see, the film was ultimately ripped from Williams' hands, and he was unable to release it as he originally envisioned, with the version that very few people actually saw being inferior to the original incomplete cut that Williams worked on for 29 years, one of the longest productions for an animated film in history. There have been many attempts to restore the original version by both fans and animation enthusiasts. The Thief and the Cobbler, the recobbled cut, is available online, and this is the version that I'm going to recommend that you check out. out, especially if you're a big fan of animation. While The Thief and the Cobbler is lacking in terms of character and story in my opinion, the animation here is undeniable. This is some of the finest work of traditional animation you'll ever see by one of its most influential pioneers. You can find the recobbled cut here on YouTube, and if you're interested in the production history, be sure and check out the videos I'll be linking to in the description. So, I'm just gonna come out and say it. I have an addiction. It's not as harmful as drugs or alcohol, but it's certainly harmful to my bank account. I am addicted to buying Blu-rays in the Criterion Collection, and a new Barnes & Noble just opened up that my friend works at, and I'm in a lot of trouble because there are so many movies that I want. The next two movies I'm going to talk about are my most recent Impulse Criterion Collection buys. Some of my favorite works of art ever made are personal reflections by the artist of themselves. Their relationships, their flaws, and all that jazz has to be one of the most raw examples of an artist really putting himself out there, while also contemplating on the very nature of his eventual death from his own chaotic lifestyle. Bob Fosse is one of the most celebrated figures in musical theater, and was also a very troubled individual who overworked himself to the point of a heart attack while editing his film Lenny and directing the musical Chicago. All That Jazz is a fictionalized portrayal of those events that also lays bare the kind of person that Fosse was through the character of Joe Gideon, phenomenally portrayed by Roy Scheider. What I love most about this film is its style, with Gideon confronting his own mortality and lifestyle through his love of musical theater. That style is brought to life by some of the finest editing work I've ever seen. The hectic life of this character is felt in each repeated sequence, precise cut, and montage sequence set to some, as to be expected, great music. The finale of All That Jazz, while an explosive burst of musical energy, is also brutal and sobering. With all the fantastical imagination that Fosse uses to confront his vices, he shows us with unflinching reality where those vices will lead to. If you're as big a fan of character studies of troubled artists as I am, or maybe you're just a big musical theater nut, don't skip out on All That Jazz. It's worth your time. And now for my second Impulse Criterion buy. Directed by Jean-Pierre Melville, The Samurai is a sleek neo-noir about a methodical contract killer that does his job as perfectly as he dresses. Of course, something goes wrong on one of his hits, and he is both pursued by a determined law enforcement official and the people who hired him in the first place. While this setup may sound familiar, it's important to note that this is one of the earliest films to ever provide that setup, and it still manages to do it in a way that doesn't feel as basic as it sounds. What makes this film work are the performances, specifically the lead, and the precise direction from Melville. After the opening sequence, the film carries itself with a tension that never lets up. You can really feel that building suspense due to the film's sparse use of music, letting even some of the most intense scenes play out without any kind of musical score, reinforcing the cold, meticulous nature of our protagonist. There's a great deal of mystery around this character, but the film does a great job exploring his particular methods and viewpoints, as well as devoting ample time to the woman that covers for him and the policeman who's after him, with the conversation between those two characters being one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. It's very clear that The Samurai inspired several filmmakers from John Woo to David Fincher, and it's crazy just how well this still holds up as one of the best of the entire genre. It's suspenseful, intense, and seriously badass. I'll just end this whole section by saying that if I could pull it off, I'd dress like this character every day. Sticking with French cinema for a bit, I want to talk about a movie that really isn't comparable to any other movie I think I've ever seen. I don't even know how to begin to describe what happens in Jacques Tati's Playtime. The way this movie is set up is like you're looking at one of those crazy Where's Waldo pages that's somehow come to life. The camera is never pushed in for a close-up, always shooting wide as the expertly crafted visual comedy unfolds from every possible part of the screen. If you've only seen it once, you simply haven't seen Playtime. This is a movie that demands multiple viewings for you to catch all the gags happening. While a lot of comedy nowadays relies on dialogue, Tati utilized the medium of film to generate his laughs, and this film is packed with them. This is one of those foreign films that I think is perfectly suited to be someone's introduction to the idea of international cinema, because even though the language that's spoken is French, the visuals are what guides us from crazy situation to even crazier situation, the events of which all unfold on this massive set that was designed by Tati himself. Perfectly suited for 70mm film. I hope one of these days to catch this one in a proper theater because the biggest screen possible is needed for the full effect. Despite being first and foremost a comedy, it isn't mindless. There's something said beneath all the gags about our consumerist society and our obsessive modernization that distracts us from the beauty that has existed for centuries. A recurring group of characters in Playtime are a bunch of tourists visiting Paris and completely ignoring the iconic landmarks because they're distracted by all the insane technology and modern architecture. Some of it literally being built as they're experiencing it. This is a one-of-a-kind film, and you'd be doing yourself a huge disservice if you didn't check it out as soon as possible. So for a few days, I guess I was on a bit of a Robert Altman kick, and that explains why the next two movies are both directed by Robert Altman. Considered by many to be Altman's masterpiece, Nashville is a massive film with a ton going on, but it somehow manages to weave all 24 of its characters and their narratives together in a way that feels so incredibly natural. A lot of that is due to both Altman's signature directorial style that allowed for improv from his actors, and the fantastic screenplay written by Joan Tewksbury. It's a towering achievement of a film that is able to pull off being so bitingly satirical of the music business, celebrity idolization and culture, politics, and everything else that consumes all of American culture, with the city of Nashville being the point where all of these ideas converge. As much as the film has to say negatively about certain aspects of the country, there's still a ton of raw humanity that seeps through, with so many layered characters brought to life by an absolutely stacked cast. There's no way I can get through every great character actor in this movie, but you've got Lily Tomlin, Keith Carradine, Ned Beatty, Scott Glenn, and even Jeff Goldblum playing a character that's bizarre even for him. There are many more actors to talk about, but I definitely need to single out the breakthrough performance of the great Shelley Duvall, who we unfortunately lost in July. She was a favorite of Robert Altman, and even appears in another one of his films that I'm going to talk about in just a second. Nashville is musical, funny, satirical, and tragic. It's a hell of a ride, and I can't recommend it enough. As you might have figured out from my Rango video, I'm a pretty big fan of westerns. I think at their best, they can be incredibly thought-provoking meditations on humanity, whether violent or righteous. Leave it to someone like Robert Altman to make what he described as an anti-western. In Macab and Mrs Miller, Altman either outright defies conventions of the Western genre, or paints elements of the Western that we've romanticized over the years in a much more bleak light. Even the setting is atypical of your regular Western. Not a small town in the middle of a scorching desert, but a community precariously huddled together on a freezing mountainside. Those people being exploited by our titular characters, who establish a brothel in the isolated town. Your usual Western heroics are nowhere to be found here, and any of the violence is portrayed as distant and often senseless. Emotion rarely governs the actions of our characters. Everything is strictly tied to business in this period of the Old West that's dying, being bled out by ruthless capitalistic practices that still retain that Western brutality, but aren't prettied up by any kind of legend. People don't walk tall in this world, and any kind of outlaw pride is merely worn as a mask by painfully real people just trying to get by. These people are brought to life by exceptional performances from Warren Beatty and Julie Christie, two truly excellent Western characters in my opinion. Another vital element to Macab and Mrs Miller are the contributions to its soundtrack by Leonard Cohen, each song just fitting the film's cold, distant tone. To me, Macab and Mrs Miller is a tragedy. Not just one brought upon our characters, but brought upon the entire romanticized world of the Wild West. And that makes it one of the very best Westerns I've ever seen. Staying in the Western genre for one more movie, I want to add a bit of a content warning for the next film. It's a Western horror movie, so keep that in mind if you decide to check it out. As one of the world's biggest Tombstone fans, I can't really turn away from Kurt Russell playing a Western lawman, especially when he's teamed up with Richard Jenkins, who's doing some of his best work in this movie. Bone Tomahawk, even before it takes a serious turn toward the end, is an effective Western for the majority of its runtime. These characters are all very endearing, each with individual tragedies that influence their decisions as the story carries on. That story revolves around a woman and deputy abducted from a small town by a hostile tribe of cannibalistic cave-dwelling Native Americans, and the small rescue party who sets out to get them back. Once the characters encounter the tribe in the final act of the film, Bone Tomahawk gets very, very disturbing, with one specific scene that I won't even think about describing or showing clips of here on YouTube. It's a blend of intense, bloody horror and Western that at its very best is badass and unexpected, but doesn't always work for me. At times it feels like you're watching two different films that were edited together. But what makes it all worth it are the performances and the suspenseful conclusion. Bone Tomahawk isn't a perfect movie by any means. I think it's a little too long for its own good, and I think it's important to address some of the issues regarding representation. The hostility toward Native Americans portrayed in this film is historically accurate, but there have been many online who have perceived this film as racist in its usage of a savage tribe as the primary antagonists. There have been several arguments made both for and against the film online, and while I'm clearly not qualified to speak on issues regarding Native American representation, I did think it was important to bring up while discussing the film. Again, Bone Tomahawk is definitely flawed, but I still recommend it for all the things that it does right, and there's plenty of elements that are stellar. The cast, the action sequences, the practical effects, and the horror sequences make this thing worth watching if you're a horror or a Western fan. And finally, for the last film, I'm always going to try to recommend something from the 30s, 40s, or 50s in these videos. The classics of old Hollywood that I have a serious soft spot for. There are few tales of filmmaking more sad than the one of Charles Laughton's only directorial effort. He simply made a masterpiece that the world wasn't ready for, and when it failed at the box office, he never directed a movie ever again. While I often wonder how many more excellent movies we could have gotten if it was a hit, I'm very glad that The Night of the Hunter is regarded today as the absolute classic that it is. I absolutely adore the way that this movie is shot. The filmmaking on display here is just brilliant, especially for a person's one and only film. The visual style matches the tone of the story, following a murderer who seduces and marries the widow of a criminal that he shared a jail cell with because he confided in him that he stole a bunch of money and hid it at his home. Only his children know where the money is, and they don't trust their mother's new husband, so what follows is a suspenseful noir thriller with sequences shot like pictures in a children's storybook. It's such a unique presentation, and just about every frame is gorgeous. The primary antagonist is played by the incomparable Robert Mitchum, in my favorite performance of his legendary career. Of all the actors from his era, he ranks with the absolute best of them. The final moments of The Night of the Hunter are some of the most suspenseful of any film from this time period, made all the more terrifying considering that the lives of two children are at stake. The Night of the Hunter is a classic, and while you may already be aware of it, I urge you to see it. I'll always champion older films, especially when they're this excellent. So there are some films for you to check out. I hope you do. If you do watch them, let me know what you think in the comments down below. And like in the first video, please feel free to leave me a recommendation down below. I'll be sure to check it out. Maybe I'll even feature it in the next video. I want to give a shout out to all my patrons and my executive producer patron, Lapis Lazuli VA, as always, for their continued support in making my videos. I've got several videos on the way that I'm currently working on. Some are being edited, some are being written right now. I'm very excited for them. Our video covering the Owl House Season 2 is on the way. We're working very hard on it right now. Thank you for your patience. And as always, thank you for liking, subscribing, commenting, and watching my videos. It means the world to me that I get to do this and that you guys enjoy it so much. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much. Take care.